High-definition video these days is dominated by the DSLR form factor. These cameras are relatively inexpensive and fit a wide range of budgets, and are pretty easy to just pick up and start shooting on. Today, I'll be comparing two cameras and seeing how they compare for shooting high-definition video. Many, perhaps even most cameras on the market today are what's called crop sensor cameras. They have a smaller sensor, about 23-24 millimeters wide, which I'm not quite sure, that's like an inch. And this makes it more forgiving with focus, and it's easier to pick up and learn for most people. The high end of the market, though, is dominated by what's called a full-frame sensor. These sensors are 36 millimeters across, making it the equal size to 35 millimeter film. Don't ask me where that extra millimeter comes from. This gives it almost double the area to capture an image in, making it not only a higher resolution, but a narrower depth of field, and much better low-light performance. I work as a wedding videographer. I trained on the crop sensor Canon 7D, and our cameras right now are the Canon 6D and the 5D Mark III. Now the differences between these two when it comes to high-definition video are very slight. The Mark III has less pronounced moire, and that's really about it when it comes to video. So I'm going to be using the 6D today as one of our comparison cameras. The other camera I have is a Sony Alpha 99, my personal camera. Don't worry about this, this is just the tripod plate. This is the flagship Alpha camera for Sony right now, though note that it's actually not a true DSLR. It's a mirrorless camera dressed up like a DSLR. If you're actually worried about the difference, look up any number of videos on YouTube that are talking about it. It's well documented. Look it up, it's fascinating stuff, but not what we're here for today. I got this for myself for a number of reasons, and I found some pitfalls coming from the Canon environment that I wasn't expecting, but there's also things about it that make me love it. I'm not interested in the numbers of these cameras so much. I mean, the Canon has a 20 megapixel sensor, and the Sony has a 24 megapixel sensor. Big whoop, high definition video is 2.1 megapixels. Instead, I'm interested in the features of these cameras that help me as a videographer, and those that hinder me. When comparing these cameras side by side, I'll be using the closest settings to each other I can on the closest lenses available. For the Canon, this will be Canon glass at 28mm and 50mm, and for the Sony it'll be my classic Minolta glass at the same focal lengths. In broad strokes, these cameras are very similar. In fact, if I took away these labels at the bottom of the screen, you'd likely have no idea which angle was shot with which camera. The end products are quite similar, owing to manual control for everything. Aperture, ISO film speed, shutter speed, white balance, and of course, focus right here on the lens. Both of these cameras are set to 4.0 aperture, 3200 ISO, 160 shutter, 4500K white balance, and if it weren't for them naming their files differently, there's a chance that I can mix them up a bit in post-production. And yet even when I try to point out what's the same, I see differences. I'm not going to go over every little feature of these cameras, but there are some ergonomics things that I want to go over really quick. The 6D has this great 8-way directional pad in back here. It's nice and clicky, very responsive, lets you know which direction you're moving in, as well as the center button for selection that is very easy to use. The Alpha 99, on the other hand, has this kind of squishy thumb selection joystick. It's more frustrating to use. Sometimes I try to go in one direction and it goes in a slightly different direction. And pushing down on the whole thing to make a selection is it's an art form, otherwise you're just going to end up moving the cursor. To keep track, the 5D Mark III also has a joystick selector that's similar to the A99's. I'm expecting the next 5D iteration they're going to adopt the 6D's directional pad. The Sony gets that point back with its articulated screen. Now I'm actually keeping track of points. No, points don't matter, it's just... Anyway, this allows me to set the camera up in any sort of weird, awkward spot. With a Canon, I'd have to make sure I could see the spot. Here, I can just flip that around and say, there's my shot, everything's good, can set up any sort of weird cramped space and still work. This also allows me to film myself really easily, whereas with the Canon, I have to rely on last-minute help. Thanks, AJ. The Canon 60D and 70D are a couple of crop sensor cameras that do have a side flip-out screen articulation. I personally prefer Sony's system, but that's entirely up to you. I also like the silent function dial that the Alpha 99 has on the front right here. This allows you to easily and silently adjust things like aperture, shutter speed, without getting that loud clicking while you're filming. I keep it set to an audio adjustment function, but it can also very easily change the function that you have it mapped to. Speaking of audio, the Alpha 99 has a stereo microphone right on top of the camera here, while the Canon audio does not. It has a mono microphone, and I'm not even sure where it is, except that I've managed to cover it up a few times while moving around a dance floor in a crowded wedding. This definitely gives the Sony a leg up on the Canon when it comes to audio, but it's still onboard microphone, and you're not going to be using that for most projects. The Alpha 99 is also good with audio because it has a microphone in jack and a headphone out jack, as well as actual levels monitoring on screen. This lets you get good audio going in and being able to make sure that it's good coming out. The 6D only has microphone in. It doesn't have headphones to monitor, and it does not have on-screen audio level monitoring. The Canon gives us no surprises when it comes to focusing. You focus with the ring on the lens. Now the Canon 70D does have the ability to autofocus during video shooting, but like its articulated screen, this is something that hasn't worked its way upmarket to the 6D or the 5D yet. The Sony does have the ability to autofocus during video shooting. Like the 70D, it can use any lens. It's recommended you use newer ones with quiet motors, but you can still use, say, my old Minolta glass just fine. But, when you throw the Sony into automatic focus mode, it goes into automatic everything. It locks your aperture at 3.5 and starts adjusting your shutter speed for exposure. No thank you. Hopefully this is something that will be fixed in a firmware update. If this is something buried under 20 menus that I haven't found, let me know, but it's very disappointing that this is how they implement it. Now the Canon, like most DSLRs, has a focus magnification feature. This lets you zoom in on a subject before you start rolling, maybe their eyeball, and make sure that you have perfect focus. Once you start rolling, however, you're not able to go into focus magnification mode. You either have to set it and leave it, or as your subject moves around, try to adjust on the fly and go by dead reckoning. Nikons might be able to use focus magnification while they're rolling. I'm not positive. I've only used them like once. So if any Nikon users out there can let me know, I'm going to leave the annotation right here that lets you know. Good? Good. The Alpha 99 can't use focus magnification while rolling. In fact, it can't in video mode at all. It can in photo mode, but unlike the Canon, you can't just start shooting movies from photo mode. You know, the Canon, if you're in manual or aperture priority or program, you hit the button and after a couple seconds it switches over and starts rolling video. The Alpha 99 can't do that. When you're in video mode, you're locked into video mode and you cannot use focus magnification. Instead, what you've got is focus peaking. It's these lines around areas of high contrast telling you that, yes, this is in focus. You can change the intensity of the peaking and you can change the color of it as it shows up, but it's still a very different use from Canon's focus magnification. When you're shooting a moving subject, focus peaking on the Sony or in a pinch autofocus will be the way to go. If you're shooting a still subject, focus magnification is going to be your best friend. Aperture gives us no surprises on these cameras. How fast or slow the lens goes is dictated by the lens itself. Canon adjusts its aperture with a dial right on the back right here, up and down, right around the directional pad. That's cute. And Sony adjusts its with a dial right up here in the corner. Now both of these, as you can tell, make very loud kind of clicking noises as they adjust. Adjust, get that back where it was. Very loud clicking noises that can be very distracting in the audio, as well as making definite stops up and down. It's not a smooth adjustment of aperture from one stop to the next. The sound can of course be mitigated by using the silent dial on the front of the Sony right here, but there's not really anything you can do about those harsh steps. ISO on the Canon can go up to 12,800 in video mode. This means that coupled with the full-frame sensor, you're still getting a good amount of detail in low-light conditions. Is it ideal? No. It's grainy and kind of weird around the edges, but when you're doing events that don't have a lot of light there, it's still very useful to get what you want and get your subject matter, even if it's not the best-looking image. The Sony, on the other hand, disappointed me. It tops out at 6400 ISO, a full stop darker, and looks worse there than the Canon does at 12800. It's just soft and smudgy and barely usable. When it comes to low light, high ISO videography, I gotta hand it to the Canon. Now both of these cameras can go down to 100 in video mode for when you're in much more ideal lighting conditions, and ISO on both can be set to automatic. The Canon bottoms out at 1/30th of a second shutter speed in video mode and goes all the way up to 1/4000th. The Sony does one stop better, going up to 1/8000th and all the way down to 1/4 of a second for speed. But let's be honest, when you're shooting 30p you're going to be using 1/60th, and when you're shooting 24p you're going to be using 1/50th, right? Right. The only reason I could think of for the Sony's increased range is, I don't know, some in-camera slow shutter effects. In addition to various baked-in presets like fluorescent, cloudy, daylight, and so forth, both of these cameras have the capability to set their white balance according to a Kelvin value. In here, I'm filming the white balance segment at night because it's kind of tricky in this location. It's set to 2500. The Sony, however, has the capability to set its white balance not only by Kelvin value, but along a sliding green-magenta scale as well, for taking out the sort of sickly green that you get from cheap fluorescents, like in my kitchen. Both cameras are capable of taking a still photograph and basing their white balance on that and saving it as a preset. The Canon saving one preset, and the Sony saving 3. This is my Boat or Cook Something preset. Note just how much green it's taking out of the shot. Neither camera is capable of changing the white balance while they're rolling, with the exception of setting it to auto white balance and hoping it'll do the work for you. Okay, I couldn't think of anywhere else to put this, so I'm just going to say it now before we go on to anything with post-production. When you hit the record button on the Canon, as long as you're in video mode, it's going to start rolling right away, immediately, as soon as you hit the button. With the Sony, even though you're already in video mode, it's going to take a second or two to start going. In event videography, this can be disastrous. If you need to get something the moment it's happening, if you see something cool, you start rolling and point your camera at it, and on the Canon you got it. On the Sony, you're waiting. If you're doing that kind of stuff, that's a big strike against the Sony. Alright, we're going to start getting into some technical stuff, so don't worry when I start looking at my teleprompter over here. And by teleprompter, I mean laptop. When you're recording video on the Canon 6D, you're recording to H.264 QuickTimes at 1080p, 24 or 30 frames a second. Yes, I know about Magic Lantern and recording to RAW video, but this is confusing enough as it is. So those of you in the know, go back to your fairy world where you know everything. You have a choice of all-I intraframe compression or IPB interframe, a difference that's really hard to describe, but let's just say that all-I is a higher bitrate, giving you better reproduction of fast motion, with the twin pitfalls of a higher file size and being a lot more processor intensive. I personally stick to IPB for a number of reasons. When we were shooting on Final Cut 7, it was easy to transcode and bring in. And moreover, you can fit a lot more on the SD card than you can with all-I. Aside from high motion, the differences are pretty minor. The Canon can also record at 720p at 60 frames a second, in standard definition at 480 back down to 30 frames a second, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. Keep in mind, if you're in a PAL country instead of NTSC, you'll be at 25 and 50 frames a second for 1080 and 720 respectively, instead of 30 and 60. The Sony takes a different approach to its variety. You can record MP4 QuickTimes at standard definition or high definition, 30 frames a second, and this is suitable for immediate YouTube upload to send to friends and family and what have you. But the Sony will shine when you keep it in what I think is its factory default, AVC HD. In it, you're recording 1080p at 24 frames a second or at 60. Not 30, 60. This lets you slow down the shot for in-camera slow motion, half speed, or you can just drop it into a regular 30p timeline and you can't tell the difference. But where AVC HD really shines is in its... Is it the bit depth? Is it a logarithmic color space? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the technical term is for it. I'm not sure why. But whatever it is, it means that Sony's AVC HD has more information in it than Canon's H.264 recording. Now what does that mean? Look at this shot. We're going to look at Coco here because you've seen enough of my face. He's lit really harshly and a good sized block of his face is overexposed. You can also see that the Alpha 99 shot is not as perfectly focused as it could be because I was having to rely on focus peaking, which showed me a range of stuff instead of what was absolutely in focus, like the focus magnification. Anyway, so we can see that his face is lit really harshly and a whole side of his face is overexposed. Now we're going to pull both of these into Adobe Premiere and we're going to drop our color corrector filter on them. As I drag down output white on the Canon clip, note that everything that was overexposed white stays as a solid block that just gets darker, grayer, ickier. Not great to look at. Now when I pull down output white the same amount on the Sony AVC HD clip, there we go. I was going to have a line here about look at that fuzzy detail, but there's not a whole lot of detail because it's out of focus. But he's still fuzzy in multiple ways, and we can see that a lot of that detail that was lost to the overexposed white has come back to his natural gray skin tone. Probably should have used a different model, but whatever. Anyway, while we may not be getting a ton of that detail back, not as if we were shooting, say, a raw video file or like you're getting with raw photo files, it's still a major improvement. So this is the part where I tell you that I regret my decision to get a Sony and wish I'd gotten a Canon instead. Or where I tell you that I love my Sony and hate shooting on Canon cameras now. Neither of these are the case. These are both great cameras from great ecosystems, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. These disadvantages are ones that are just going to get better as time goes on with new firmware for these cameras and better cameras that succeed them. The differences are minor and really stuff that shouldn't dissuade you from one ecosystem or the other, but should instead excite you for them. Hopefully you found this video to be informative and helpful, and even fun. If so, be sure to subscribe to me on YouTube, and you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you next week. Alright, I want to give thanks to AJ here who came to help me shoot. This was kind of a last minute, oh hey, you know, I need to have someone helping me out to check behind the Canon because it doesn't have the flip around screen and just better eye and focus. And someone that came in and helped me out, and he stepped up and did a great job devoting the afternoon to this. I also want to thank my boss for letting me borrow one of the cameras from work because it's hard to talk about a Canon without one in hand, and it's hard to talk about the Sony without another camera to film it. So, thanks guys!